Welcome to the Music Business Insights Podcast. I'm your host, Orlando Alvarez, and if you're desperate to break into the music business and want to hear tips and advices from insiders, this podcast is for you. You'll be able to discover from the professionals themselves what it takes to do what they do and where to start if you're a beginner. Are you ready? Let's go. Welcome to the Music Business Insight Podcast. Today, it's a pleasure to have with me here in the show, Aron Bernstein. He's a music teacher for over 25 years. He's a music composer. And he has an amazing program coming up, which I want you to hear about because it's going to be really epic. And I wanted to introduce Aron. So Aron, say hi to the audience.
Hey, everybody. How are you doing?
And it's pretty exciting because Aron lives here in Portland as well. And we just connected over LinkedIn. It's a pleasure to have you here, Aron. And so I just wanted to go in depth a little bit more into music theory and how important it is for musicians. It's one of those things that nowadays everyone can make music with an iPad.
Yeah.
Everyone can make music with an iPhone. There's kids doing music all over the place with, barely any knowledge of music as well, just based on their ears. I want to discuss a little bit more how important it is for them to know a little bit of music theory, especially with your program that is coming up. If you want to talk a little bit more about that, that would be great.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, the first thing I guess I want to say is I think it is great that it's easier than ever in many ways to create music because it should be easy. There's this myth about music that only a select few people, the elite, 1/10 of 1%, are, have either the skill or the musicality to create music, and that just isn't true. I think music making should be everybody's province. So I think it's great that it's easy, that we have so many computerized tools for creating music. But one of the things, this kind of goes to when I was getting my undergrad degree, and I myself have always been a theory nerd. I just love music theory, but I was approached by a number of other students who said, do I really have to learn about augmented sixth chords? Do I have to learn about alternate dominants? When am I ever going to use this as a songwriter or a musician?
That's me. That sounds like me.
Yeah, but that's okay because it's a very fair question because it's very hard to teach music theory without it being lecture and a lot of drilling. And it can be very daunting and very exasperating after a while. And so I think in a nutshell, the real point of music theory is to answer that very question. When are you going to use it? And it's really, I think music theory is kind of like the language of a musical tradition. It kind of makes the difference between learning a bunch of pieces, how to play a bunch of pieces, and actually learning skills that will help you to learn on your own. So I guess it would be like a good analogy would be like I could phonetically learn to speak another language. I could phonetically learn to speak a lot of Spanish phrases, but that doesn't mean I'm really able to converse in Spanish. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what music theory is like. It's making you fluent in the language of music. So you don't have to have somebody else teach you how to learn a piece or how to compose, but you actually learn how to do it on your own, which I think is just very empowering.
Yeah, that's true. Especially the problem I'm seeing more often is that there's a lot of music producers that go into YouTube and there's a bunch of information there. There's really good information as well, but at the same time, it's all scattered and sometimes it can be really, really confusing. So for me, it was a little bit easier because I went through music school. Back in Cuba, I really studied, music full on. I just had to learn the software and the technical aspect of it, like all the rest, EQ and compression and all this stuff that I didn't knew about. But the music, the ear was there. So this is training. This is the that um, base training that you need to be proficient at music. It's the way I see it. And I see so many mistakes that young producers do. And that's why, if you have the knowledge of music theory, that base knowledge, that can help you tremendously, because you naturally are going to do things that are going to help you make your arrangement sound more professional, get more engagement with your music. So that's the way it is.
Yeah, I agree. And it started kind of like, I think in the late 70s and the early 80s, where you had drum machines and sampling machines. And there was a time when everybody wanted the sound of, say, John Bonham and Led Zeppelin. I want that big, powerful drum sound. And so Bonham's drumming was sampled and used and reused. There's nothing wrong with doing that. But when you learn the theory, you're no longer using somebody else's exact style or performance as a template, but you're getting in there and you're actually creating something new. I mean, certainly influenced by somebody else. There's a difference between, just because you're doing something new doesn't mean you don't have influences.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, when you have this kind of arsenal of skills, whether they're rhythmic or harmonic or melodic or whatever it is, you just begin to you can create something, whether it's a song or a symphony or whatever jazz quintet, that is really truly something that you have put together, and it's not a collage of samples.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it is more empowering.
Definitely. There's tools right now that are unbelievable. Let's face it. Digitally, things like Arcade, which is sample based, but it has tremendous value for people doing music production nowadays. They made it so easy that you can just play one note and that's it. But the problem with that is that what people don't understand is that it's super easy, but if you don't know what you're doing arrangement wise, or the musicality of it, what are you trying to accomplish, what are you trying to express through feelings, because it's not the same just grabbing this sample and this and that and just try to mash it together. Is that if you know the music theory, actually you can create your own complete world,
Yeah,
and you don't have to rely on anything else,
yeah,
not samples, not anything. You can literally create things from scratch, and that's the difference. I'm doing the podcast for people who want to learn more,
yeah.
and I know that you have an awesome program coming up, Breaking Barlines, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. And I can't tell you how long it took me to come up with that name. It's
I
I,
bet it's a pretty cool name.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
I'm glad you think so. That's good. Basically, I chose that name because I have found. See, I came to music late. I didn't start playing music at all or reading music. Really, virtually no music education until I was 19. So I came very late to it, very late in life, and what I realized was that in the course of learning music myself and also in the course of teaching it, I found that there are a lot of genuinely musical people out there. It's not it's not the kind of thing where, like I talked about before, where just a tiny sliver of humanity has any aptitude. That's not the case. Everybody has some form of musical aptitude. And when I started late, I discovered aptitude that I never knew I had. And yet I think much of the world is under the shadow of the Western European musical tradition, which is an amazing tradition. It's the one that I'm trained in, but Western music went just so far in the direction of notating music, writing it down and having this really sophisticated notation system. So much so that there are certain attitudes, kind of Eurocentric attitudes, that have really cropped up as a result. And one of them is that if you can't write it down, or if you don't know how to read music, that means you're not musical, or it's not really music. And that's really unfortunate, because most of the world's musical traditions, which are at least as old and highly developed as Europe, have not focused on notation. They focus maybe on other things. They focus on rhythmic or melodic complexity or more improvisation. And so, unfortunately, there are a lot of misconceptions about music, and these are barriers. Up until earlier this year, I was teaching some community ed music classes at Clark College. And I taught music theory, I taught rhythm, music history, and class piano. And I had these new beginning adult students who had avoided music like the plague, avoided lessons for decades. And they'd be in their 50s, 60s. I even had one woman, she was 80, and she had literally not had lessons in about 7 decades. So
Wow.
coming into that classroom, yeah, for her was a huge deal. And I
Mhm.
could sometimes they come in almost like they're stepping into like a confessional booth. It's like me, it's been 60 years since my last lesson, and I can see their reticence and their fear
Mhm.
about it because all their like half their lives they've been bombarded with these myths that unless you start early, it's too late. And so that's kind of one of the things I like doing is reassuring new students, if they're beginners, that you have to start somewhere. And there's no shame in a late
Exactly.
start. I'm a late beginner. Um, and so for me, Breaking Barlines is an attempt to make music theory accessible, and just sort of breaking through these psychological barriers, some of which are the result of these myths out there about music. It just occurred to me that I think one of my greatest teachers is mistakes that I've made
Mhm.
in teaching theory and piano, and because every student learns in a different way, and as a teacher, the first thing you realize is that no two students are going to learn the same way, and just because you understand it and learned it a certain way doesn't mean it's going to make sense to a student, and that doesn't mean they're incapable. It just means you have to change tack and kind of broaden this sort of palette of approaches. And so that's one of the things I really try to do with Breaking Barlines. So it consists of video lessons that are arranged into modules. So I have like fundamentals, learning how to read music if you've never read music before, scales, chords, rhythm, diatonic and chromatic harmony, counterpoint, musical form, all the good stuff.
Nice.
And basically, it's as much as possible, I try to make it an ear first approach so that whenever there's a new concept being introduced, you hear it first. That's really the whole point. You can't really teach music theory by lecturing about it first. If you want
Mhm.
someone to understand the difference between like 2/4 and 6/8, simple meter, compound meter, you want to let them experience that. Have them get up and clap a measure of 2/4 and then a measure of 6/8, go back and forth.
Mhm.
And by then they understand it. They actually have an experience of it. And then the notation, actually what it looks like on the page, becomes kind of a reinforcement of that rather than trying to start with the page. That's another mistake I made for years, is starting with the page and trying to get students to understand that way. And it just doesn't work well. It's not really how music is supposed to be taught. So there's a lot of ear first and ear training approach, and really getting a lot of humor in it. Just anytime something starts to seem daunting, just laughing at it. Like when you get to double sharps and double flats, which everybody hates,
No.
just laughing at it a little bit and saying, why can't we just call this key G? It looks like G, sounds like G. Why do we have to call it F double sharp?
Exactly.
So yeah, just I think that the humor also takes some of the sting out of what could otherwise be, pretty daunting stuff.
Mhm. I
So,
remember when I
oh,
was learning that, I mean, that's a big part actually. Just having fun. Music needs to be fun. Needs to
yeah,
be something that you enjoy. Once you stop enjoying it, it's kind of hard. Again, nothing against uh, really going at it and really putting your effort in, because I know it's painful. I
it
spent
can be.
years and years trying to learn, and when I see new people trying to, when I see someone saying, "Hey, I want to learn how to play the drums. Can you teach me?" And I'm like, "So what's your goal?" "Oh yeah, I want to learn by I know in a month I'll be playing already." And I'm like, "Okay, that's not that's not realistic." And again, you can do so much, but again, it's part of that thing that you need to enjoy it, but at the same time put the effort to actually accomplish something. So glad you're doing a program like that, because there's so much information that it's missing out there, especially in this subject. And it's great to just to have a system to learn, learn it all, because just looking for one video on YouTube and then another, and it doesn't work. It doesn't work like that. I always ask, what was your childhood like, and what developed that music, ear, or that music instinct, or that love for music.
Yeah, well, as I said, I didn't take lessons as a child at all, but I was surrounded by music. My dad, especially, he was heavy into Beethoven and also sort of I guess 40s jazz. So we had Glenn Miller, Benny Goodman. So a lot of the old stuff. So I always knew that I had music inside of me. I've always been stirred by music, whether it was a pop song or whether it was a Beethoven symphony. But the funny thing is, in my teens, all throughout high school, I thought I was going to go into astronomy. I had some telescopes. I was an avid backyard astronomer, and I thought, all right, that's me. I'm going to get a PhD in astrophysics, and I'm going to work at, I don't know, Jet Propulsion Laboratory and find out about the universe. And then I got to my first semester of college, and I hit calculus, and that pretty much ended the whole thing for me. It's just, it was really weird. It was kind of a scary time. And I think a lot of young people who kind of hit, just those couple of years after high school, where you're really not sure what you're going to do with your life. You're not sure how you're going to make a living. It's a scary time. And so like the fall semester of my first year of college, going over to the spring, I really felt like I was just, kind of falling off the earth and just like into this oblivion of not knowing. And then the following spring, in the spring of 1993, really almost on a whim, I decided to just give music a try. And I checked out a couple of books from the library, partially taught myself how to read music. I ended up taking some piano classes and eventually had, studied with teachers. And right away, I started composing. I mean, right from the beginning, when I just had a minimum of knowledge, I started trying to write my own music, and I've been composing ever since.
Mm-hmm.
And that's actually one of the things I like about being a creator. You don't really have to have years of skill under your belt in order to start creating right from the beginning. You could have two notes and two rhythms, and you can actually make a really viable song or a piece out of it. And then as your harmonic and rhythmic vocabulary grow, obviously you could do a lot more. But that's another thing that I try to put. I'm trying to put into Breaking Barlines is once we've learned a concept, there's going to be like a practice video where you actually take only the skills you've just learned, a couple of things, and see how far you can go with it. When I was learning music for the first time, it almost felt like I was sort of excavating something that I already really knew, except now I was putting a name to all these faces. That it's like, oh, I've totally heard this chord progression before, and now I know what it's called. It's called Neapolitan or whatever it is, an authentic cadence. I just didn't know the terminology. But I really feel that anybody can come to music that way, regardless of how receptive your ear might be or your sense of rhythm. I think it's maybe 1% aptitude, and the other 99% is really the learning. And you work hard enough at anything for long enough, you're going to get pretty good at it.
Yeah, it's a matter of time and practice, and just keep at it, because I remember it was hard back in school, and it was, it takes you really wanting this and moving forward with it. I wasn't one of those students. That's why I said it before. I'm that student that it's like, do I really need to learn this? And the first time I grabbed a software to make music, that was like, the world to me, because I was doing my own things. Even when I was trying to copy other songs, I was doing it with my own sounds and doing my own arrangement and all this. And it's a wonderful world. That whole creation process, it's amazing. And once you learn all this stuff, all these music theories, um, that can really push you through to another level completely. Do you play any instruments, right?
I do, yeah. I play piano, and that was the instrument that I really took to. I tried the violin,
Hmm.
and I broke my left index and middle fingers when I was 8. I had the brilliant idea to go swinging from a bookshelf. I tell and I have students. I teach a lot of children, and very often kids break bones all the time. And I
Mm.
always tell them, you came by your injury a lot more intelligently than I did. So don't go swinging from any bookshelves. Yeah, because of that, I can't bend those two fingers all the way to my palm. So I
Mm.
tried the violin, and all the notes on those two strings kept coming out sharp because I just couldn't
Mm.
bend the finger enough. But piano is piano is really my instrument. And as a composer, it actually took me a long time to get away from the piano. So I would say that out of the 27 years that I've been composing, it took about 20 years before I felt comfortable writing for the full orchestra.
Mm.
So that was like 4 years ago. I finally wrote a symphony. And I really didn't entirely know what I was doing, but I knew enough, I felt, and I jumped in. I just said, let's see what happens.
Mhm.
And it's okay to do that. You can come in armed with some knowledge, and just go where it leads you. And to be honest, I some of my best musical ideas have come through, just by making mistakes and
Mm.
and thinking, oh, I didn't mean for it to be that chord, but you know what? That sounds even better. Let's go with it. And it's okay to do that. It doesn't make you any less creative. So there's an element of the accident in
Mm.
there, which I think is okay to embrace, especially if you're learning how to play. And A lot of students are just, children and adults, just horrified of making mistakes. And I think it's the job of any music teacher to say that this is part of being a musician, is
Mhm.
making a mistake and making a lot of them. It's okay.
So to those people who say, learning music this way, learning music theory, learning how to write all the notes and all this, that it's super boring, that the only people who does that, it's the people who are gonna compose music for, I don't know, symphony or
Yeah.
doing this kind of orchestral work.
Yeah.
uh,
Oh,
what would you say to them?
it's I would say that is the first thing I would say is, again, it's valid to feel that way. Again, I mean, I like on my bookshelf over here, I have got like 2 decades of music theory books, and just looking at them kind of makes me a little ill, because I've read them, I've done exercises from them, so it's totally understandable to feel like, yeah, music theory just totally dulls the creative edge. What I would say is, if music theory is taught in the right way, if it teaches you how to be creative and like immediately, then I think it's being done right. If
Mhm.
it's being done as a series of drills that have no connection to living, breathing, actual music, then I think we're going on the wrong path. But I think that if you can introduce each new concept in music theory by ear, if you're going to teach, say, I don't know, like an authentic cadence, like going from your 5 chord to your 1 chord. Don't talk about it first. Just listen to some music, and not just Beethoven. Listen to Elton John. Listen to Scott Joplin, some ragtime, any piece that clearly shows that cadence. Just hear it in a lot of music, so that even if you can't name it yet and it doesn't make sense to you, it does make sense to your ear. And that's really the beginning. And that's really how music should be learned, is just by experience. And so I think, just as a music theory teacher, I've learned, again, through successes and failures, how to make sure that the minute we learn a new concept, we're already applying it to something creative. We're working with it, maybe creating a short piece out of it, or just really hearing it at work in living music. And so just always striking that balance between the need to do that work and all that drilled stuff, and then having fun with it and being creative. I think that's the proper way to teach music theory. So I guess, I don't know, long story short, that's kind of my answer.
Yeah, no, and for me, every time I see someone also uh, going at music theory and all this, and basically disparaging all of it. I always try to kind of lean in and say, hey, you know what? If you knew a little bit of it, you wouldn't believe how good you would get, because it's one of those things. And throughout my life, I experienced that, and I'm so glad for that, because I had to experience, like, my own music from Cuba, all the traditional, Latin American
Yeah.
percussion, Afro-Cuban actually, percussion,
Okay.
and all this stuff and all these genres. That opened one part.
Mhm.
Once I went into symphony orchestra, because I play in the symphony orchestra from my hometown. It was amazing. I mean, just listening to everything from you being a musician in a symphony orchestra is just a whole new world of experience and ear knowledge that nobody's going to take away from you, because you already know it. And that kind of went into my absolute delight for cinematic music, music for movies. That's amazing. I love the world from movies, and that comes from a place of knowing a lot of this mix of music that I have already on my under my belt.
Uh,
And that's what people don't understand. If you knew a little bit Pirates of the Caribbean, or this
yeah.
crazy music from the movies, oh, here they're doing a 3/4, this is 6/8. In practicality, for music producers that are listening to this show, and they're so used to the 4/4 that they don't even know it's there.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that if you knew that you can change that, and you can, in the middle of something, just change that little number there that you don't know what it's for,
Yeah.
that can make the arrangement so much interesting. And there's no limits. Once you learn this stuff, there's no limit to what you can create, and you can basically replicate anything that you want. That's the advantage. That's what I see, that knowledge coming in and making you 10 times better.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I think that speaks to the other advantage of music theory is it basically, I don't know any other way to put it. It's kind of like the why of music. It's basically it's one thing to do something really great and really creative, which is great. But if you understand why you've either followed a certain rule or broken it,
Mm-hmm.
because people say, well, rules are made to be broken, but there's a difference between breaking a rule and never having known about the rule. And I think if you
Mm-hmm.
know the rules and you're consciously saying, okay, these rules of voice leading, making sure I don't have parallel fifths and parallel octaves, that's great for Bach. But for these purposes, I want to break those rules, and I know why I'm doing it, because I don't want it to sound like Bach. I want it to sound like this. And so I just think being able to say why, to create something is awesome, but to be able to say why you're doing it this way, like you said, it points to having a lot more knowledge and sort of power at your disposal. You sound like you're really steeped in Afro-Cuban music,
Mm-hmm.
and that at times, especially like West African polyrhythms. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
that can get as far from as possible from just the standard 4/4. So I was
No,
curious.
you can get actually, it's super crazy, because when I started studying this, there's this African instruments that it's super typical of Afro-Cuban music. The batas, there are three of them. They have like two heads from the two sides, and there's like three of them. The biggest one has like a big head on one side and a really small one on this side, and there's two more like that, like going in small sizes. You can actually play the three of them by yourself, and it's crazy. Or the actual way it's meant to be placed by three people. So
Okay.
it takes a lot for you to, it's just one beat that you're doing, but you have to listen to the other two people doing it, and at the same time it's 6/8, and some of these rhythms are like going to 6/8, but one of those drums are going completely in two. So it's kind of tan 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 tan, and the other one's tan 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 tan, and it's crazy. It goes
Yeah.
like super crazy, and people don't know when they listen to that. they're like, okay, this is completely crazy, but you actually have it written down. And once you see it, when you learn what it is, it's like, wow, this is really really good. And you can take that and put it in some other place, and that's the advantage. You're just gathering knowledge, and you can use it at any time. And
Yeah,
Afro-Cuban percussion is really interesting on that side. Yeah.
absolutely. And it's I was also curious to know. So you played at the you were in is it called Ulgin? Is that
Yeah,
the
my hometown is Holguin. That's
okay.
province east of Cuba. It's so Havana is on the west side, and Holguin is on the other side completely. So yeah.
So when you played for the orchestra there, was it a like a European classical symphony orchestra, or did it incorporate any Afro-Cuban music?
Yeah, they do both. Actually, they go full on all European music, Bach, Beethoven, you name it,
Yeah.
Sostakovich, Tchaikovsky, all of it. And they also have Cuban pieces done for orchestra that are really good as well, and they mix Latin music with the symphony orchestra as well. It's really interesting as well.
Wonderful. I think that when you're borrowing music from another tradition, which I'm very much in favor of, I think it just there's a reason why the European tonal system eventually fell apart at the end of the 19th century, and you eventually got Arnold Schoenberg with 12-tone music, which is still, after more than a century, very hard for people to listen to. It really it never found much of an audience outside of academia. But when you're going into somebody else's tradition, the thing that I most respect is when you're making a serious study of somebody else's music. And I think, like, in the when the Beatles were big in the 60s, George Harrison, I believe, studied with Ravi Shankar. And so there was this sort of late 60s psychedelic phase where Americans started to get interested in like North Indian Hindustani music.
Hmm.
But it was more of like, I don't know, kind of like an appropriation. So like the Beatles have a song, I think it's Norwegian Wood, where they have a sitar playing in it. And, yeah, that's borrowing the flavor of somebody else's tradition, but it doesn't really mean that they looked in depth at Northern Indian music. Whereas somebody like John McLaughlin, he formed a group, I think it was called Shakti, in the 1970s. He worked with Indian musicians, and you can tell that he had made a very serious study, that he looked at the Indian ragas and the Indian talas, the rhythmic
Hmm.
cycles, and tried to see where they had common ground with jazz scales and rhythms used in jazz. And so, I mean, it's up for debate how successful that fusion was, but when you listen to it, you can tell that this is someone who's really tried to get inside somebody else's tradition. And I just have a lot of respect for that. Just really looking at the best of what another culture or tradition has to offer, and seeing if you can find common ground with it. And that's, yeah, like you said, that's just a wonderful thing, and it's a huge world of musical language, just an immense world.
That's how we ended up with things like Latin jazz as well,
Yeah.
that I share with you. And it's just that fusion of many things.
Yeah.
It's because Cuban music has many traditions. It's music from Africa, but it's also music from Spain. So we have the guitars there, we have the bass. Um, Cuban traditional music use the upright bass. Actually, we have another instrument for bass, which is the marimbula, which is another. It's like a piece of wood. That it has like three metal things that you play, and it goes into that box and makes a bass sound. It's super interesting, all this music with the African roots, because once I started listening to Brazilian music, I started connecting the dots with things we do in Cuba, with Cuban music that sounds so similar. And it's just a matter of the swing to it. Brazilian music has a swing to some of the beats, especially percussive, percussive instruments. And Cuban has another flavor to it, and it's pretty cool to see those connections once you know. For me, Cuban music, which is has influenced so much because we have so many genres. Cubans don't even know that much right now. Music in Cuba is denigrated so much, and there's people outside of Cuba actually doing the genres that we lost completely, like danzón or pilón or cha 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 or all these genres that nobody in Cuba does it anymore. Nowadays, it's more pop music or reggaeton or it's all this stuff, and it's hard for me. I want to see like people grabbing all that and pulling back together and creating something new. There's a guy who does um funk, but it's with Cuban stuff. It's like
Wow.
Afro funk, something like that. The name of this guy, it's Cima Funk. That's the name of the band actually. It's Cima Funk,
Okay.
all together, and it's super interesting. Just listen to it. It's basically funk but mixed with Cuban music. I'm gonna do a flash round because I always do that, and it's super fun. Only rule is that you need to answer as fast as you can.
Okay.
So, what would you be doing right now if it wasn't for your current job?
Do you mean my teaching job?
Yeah.
Teaching, I would probably be working full time on Breaking Barlines. The video editing process is it's very enjoyable, but it's really, really time consuming, and it can take
Mm,
like a week and a half to 2 weeks just to produce one video.
yeah.
Um, and so I think that's probably what I'd be doing is just hitting that, 6 days a week.
Nice. Um, what is the most useless talent you have?
Most useless talent I have. I would say flipping knives. For some reason, I'm kind of a weirdo. I'll take a paring knife from the kitchen. I've done this since I was a teenager and just like flip it, do like a flip and a half double flip, and then watch it half the time fall to the floor. So nothing. There's no skill in my life that has ever really come to fruition because of that. So that would have to be it.
So, which famous musicians do you admire?
Um, let's see. Well, the one I mentioned before, John McLaughlin, with his group Shakti, I admire him very much. Just musicians or composers also.
Both.
Well, I'd say my favorite classical composer would be Brahms. He's just I don't know, his whole musical language just on both I think an intellectual and an emotional level just really speaks to me. The 19th century, Clara Schumann, wife of Robert Schumann, she this woman toured throughout Europe as a virtuoso pianist, and she had 7 kids. So I don't know how she did that. And then in the modern time, I really love Billy Joel. I just really admire him as a songwriter. And one of the musicians I admire tremendously right now is he actually is another guy who teaches at the school that I'm at. We both teach at a small private school in Portland, and he's a jazz musician, and he's like a storm on the piano. He can just do anything, and I really really admire his skill. It's amazing to watch.
Nice. What is the best advice you've been given?
Um, Dare to make mistakes. And that is a difficult thing for me because I kind of think of myself as a recovering perfectionist. And yet when I teach, I teach students that perfectionism is like a stranglehold. The greatest way to learn, the greatest way to discover is to just do something, mess it up, and see what the result is. And the result is always going to be something interesting and will teach you something. So
That's so true. Everything that you do, it's actually teaching you, and it's a growing experience actually for
yeah.
you.
And music theory can help with that. It really can because it helps you to trust yourself. And that's a huge part of improvising is trusting that whatever you do, whatever you commit to, it's going to work one way or another. Yeah, that's hard to settle into. It takes a while to settle into to be comfortable with that.
Yeah, it's just seeking experiences. If you could change anything about the music industry today, what would it be?
Um, I would say A person's musical tradition is, I think, a huge part of their culture's language. And when you have sort of a global, mainstream genre, like pop or something, and it comes in and it to like a certain region in the world, to a country, and it begins to replace, like you were saying, it largely has replaced a lot of these older Cuban genres. And that newer generations tend to forget those older genres. I guess my wish would be to just have a healthier balance between this sort of globalized mainstream and keeping these older traditions, musical traditions, alive, so that there's less of a friction between them and more of like a cooperation. And I think you were talking about Brazil a minute ago. I don't know Brazilian music that well, but I know that there are these two competing styles. There's I think it's called caipira, which is sort of a more traditional folksy style, and then there's sertaneja, which is sort of the more mainstream pop sound. And the musicians on both sides are amazing, but there's a lot of friction between that and a lot of debate. And I just think that if there were some way to have more of a balance.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess that's what I'd like to see happen in the music industry. I know that's a big, like, monolithic term, but to just make sure that we can have a globalized mainstream without it being at the expense of this rich fabric of older traditions.
The more music you know and the more music you listen to, not only like what you think it's gonna push your career forward. It's like listen to everything. And I mean like everything. And you're gonna start realizing, oh wow, this is super interesting, and this rhythm, it's so much like this other rhythm from another different country, which has nothing to do with each other, and just start seeing connections, and that only brings your musical expertise to another level and opens your mind to another things, because it only makes you a better composer, a better musician, the more music you listen to, because it's just experience.
I agree. It takes a little bit of courage and just more than anything persistence. You hear a genre of music, or even if it's just a songwriter, and you don't care for them right off the bat, the best thing you can do is just keep listening. Eventually, you may never end up liking a certain genre, but at least you now have incorporated that into your experience and can maybe use it in some way. So yeah, it's just being persistent with musical experiences, and just trying not to shut it down every time you encounter something new. And it's hard, because the minute something new comes around, you're not used to it. It's natural to feel kind of apprehensive, but to just push through that and listen again. I think it's good advice for anybody.
It's just finding that originality and doing that musically, and realizing that there's people that are going to listen to your music if you do something interesting.
Yeah, I think music theory, in a way, is it's kind of a way to take all these. It's sort of like a more, I don't want to call it academic, but a more educational analog of taking different musical traditions and taking just different genres and expanding your vocabulary, and just having more to work with. It really is.
So where can people find, so when are you releasing actually Breaking Barlines, and where can people find it and find your work as well?
Well, I have a website. It's simply breakingbarlines.com. And right now, if you want 3 free video lessons, all you have to do is just type in your email, and I'll send those to you, including worksheets that will help you just kind of deal with the concepts in the videos. And then the actual launch is going to be with sort of like my core curriculum. That's going to, I'm hoping to do that on or about November 1st this year, so in about 6 weeks.
Awesome.
But you can also check out a lot of other information on my YouTube channel. If you go to YouTube, you can just type in Breaking Barlines or Aron Bernstein, and you'll see, you can just go right to my channel. And if you like it, you can subscribe. I love getting new subscribers. It's like a little present online. I also have a Facebook page, and that has additional information, including weekly. It's been a couple weeks since I've done one of these, but every week or every other week, I have like sort of a video sample of a new lesson. So it's not the complete lesson, but it's like a 50-second sample of what that video lesson will be like. And then I also have some behind the scenes stuff on Instagram. Just go to Breaking Barlines on Instagram and you can see sort of film set shots and other interesting information about just my teaching philosophy. And I got married last year, so there's one or two pictures of me and my wife up there. So a couple of random.
Congrats! Yeah.
Thanks.
It's been a tremendous pleasure talking to you and
you too.
going into this world of music theory, which is, I think, so underrated. And I think there's a lot of value in it that for some reason not that many people see. But again, it's amazing. It can make you such a good musician in a short time, actually, if you put the effort to learn a little bit.
The curriculum itself, there will be a suggested order of video viewing, but I'm also conscious that a lot of people will be coming to my curriculum who already have a lot of knowledge. Maybe they're great at rhythm and meter, but they need to brush up on harmony. So it's not the kind of site where you're forced to watch everything in a certain order. You can skip around and jump between modules and see any lesson in any order. And I just think that's the most user-friendly way.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
because there's a lot of people that are gonna come with different experience on music theory. So for sure, definitely. I congratulate you for creating this. I wish you all the best. The invitation is open for whenever you wanna come back. Absolutely. As well. And thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you.
Yeah, you too. And this is the first podcast I've ever done, and it's really been. I just feel privileged that I'm not only doing this podcast, but that I'm talking to a musician who has such a rich background of knowledge and experience. So I really appreciate this podcast that you put together.
Thank you. And see you on the next one.
Thank you so much. You take care.